Welcome to Dear Fans. Caitlin Clark stood in the first-class line dressed, simply a stark contrast to the luxury around her. A man watched her with disdain, unable to hide his arrogance. What happened next would leave everyone on that plane completely speechless and forever change one life. The Los Angeles airport was as busy as ever, people coming and going, conversations blending together, luggage rolling in all directions. In the middle of it all, Caitlin Clark stood calmly in the first-class line. She wore a hoodie, athletic joggers, and sneakers that had clearly seen plenty of games. A simple backpack hung over her shoulder, looking as though it had traveled the world with her. There was nothing flashy about her, and perhaps because of that she went unnoticed, yet anyone who took a closer look could sense something different. It wasn't just the way she dressed, but the calmness she carried. While everyone else appeared rushed and anxious, she remained still, unaffected by the chaos around her. Behind her in line was Victor Harding. He was the complete opposite, dressed in an expensive suit with polished shoes and a cologne that demanded attention. Every movement he made seemed calculated, as if he wanted the world to know he was important. His eyes scanned the line, and when they landed on Caitlin, he smirked. "For class, huh?" he said, his tone laced with irony. "Never know who might show up here these days." Caitlin turned her head slightly, her expression calm. "Yeah, the world is full of surprises." Victor frowned, expecting a stronger reaction, something that would confirm whatever judgment he had already made, but Caitlin remained unbothered, as if the comment was meaningless. Victor wasn't satisfied. "Nothing personal, but you don't seem like the type who flies first class," he said with a soft chuckle. "It's rare to see someone so casual up here." The boarding process began, and the first-class line started moving. Caitlin and Victor, without exchanging another word, made their way toward the plane. Victor walked with firm, confident strides, while Caitlin strolled at the same relaxed pace as before, completely unaffected by the surrounding comment. Upon reaching his seat, Victor checked his ticket one more time, then looked up and saw Caitlin settling into the seat right next to his. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, shaking his head. He sat down beside her and let out a low chuckle, as if the situation were some sort of joke. "Of all the seats, it had to be here." Caitlin simply looked at him with the same calm demeanor and gave a slight smile. "Looks like we're traveling together," she said politely. Victor crossed his arms, trying to mask his discomfort. It wasn't just that he was sitting next to her, it was the fact that the person he had judged a moment ago was now sharing the same exclusive space as him. He couldn't explain why, but Caitlin's presence unsettled him. As the economy passengers finished boarding, he decided to strike up a conversation, though not in a friendly way. "So, what do you do for a living?" he asked, with the casual tone of someone who already thought they knew the answer, but wanted confirmation. Caitlin, adjusting her backpack under the seat in front of her, looked up and answered simply, "I play basketball." Victor raised his eyebrows as if surprised. "Oh, I see, college games, overseas stuff." Caitlin gave a slight smile. "Something like that." Victor chuckled. "Interesting how people try to find their place, but some spaces just aren't meant for everyone, like first class, for instance." Caitlin glanced at him briefly, but remained calm. "I think we all have our place," she replied, "and sometimes it's exactly where we are." Victor let out a short laugh. "That's nice, kind of philosophical even, but real life isn't that simple." Caitlin didn't respond immediately. She turned to the window, signaling the conversation was over. But Victor wasn't finished. "You know," he said, leaning slightly toward her, "you might be sitting here, but there are things money can't buy. Some places will never really belong to certain people." This time Caitlin didn't respond with words. She simply looked at him with an expression that carried both patience and quiet confidence. It was the kind of look that said more than any words ever could. Victor, realizing he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted, leaned back into his seat with a satisfied smirk, thinking he had the upper hand, but he had no idea how wrong he was. With the plane in the air, the flight attendant moved through first class, offering drinks. Victor made sure to be noticed. "A glass of champagne, please," he said with a confident smile, "something that matches the exclusivity of this seat." The flight attendant, accustomed to passengers like him, nodded professionally. When it was Caitlin's turn, she made a simple request. "Just water, please." Victor scoffed. "Water?" he chuckled. "Don't tell me you're going to waste the experience of flying first class with water." Caitlin took the bottle the flight attendant handed her and replied calmly, "I'm fine with this. Sometimes simplicity is enough." Victor narrowed his eyes as if trying to decode her response, then quickly pushed back. "Yeah, I guess that works for people who settle for less. Not everyone is born to enjoy the best life has to offer." Caitlin raised the bottle and took a small sip, not responding immediately. Other passengers began to notice Victor's condescending tone, but since Caitlin seemed unbothered No one intervened. Maybe the best is different for everyone, she finally said. Victor didn't like that answer. He took a deep breath, determined to maintain control of the conversation. Or maybe people who say that just never had access to what really matters. Some things are beyond the reach of certain people. You know, the flight attendant who was serving another passenger cast a discreet glance in their direction, as if considering stepping in, but she noticed Caitlin was handling the situation well. Caitlin responded with nothing more than a slight smile, turning her attention back to the window. Victor, on the other hand, wasn't satisfied. He wanted to provoke her further, but was beginning to realize that she wasn't an easy target, that while Victor thought he was winning the exchange, the passengers around them felt increasingly uncomfortable with his arrogance. Caitlin, however, remained unshaken. Victor was about to face a reality check that would make him rethink everything he believed about status, power, and respect. The flight attendant returned, collecting glasses. Victor, still determined to win, continued, "You know what's funny?" he said. "People who have nothing to show for themselves always talk about things like humility and simplicity. Ever noticed that?" Caitlin leaned forward slightly and met his gaze. "I've noticed that the people who talk the most about what they have are usually the ones who feel the emptiest inside." The words hung in the air, and for the first time Victor had no immediate response. He opened his mouth, but could find the right words. The passengers exchanged glances, some visibly impressed by Caitlin's calm but firm approach. Victor tried to recover. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but the world is competitive. If you don't show what you have, people will ignore you." Cain leaned back in her seat. "Maybe, but I think true success doesn't need to be shouted about. It speaks for itself." The atmosphere in first class had shifted. Many passengers were now fully tuned into the conversation. Some whispered to one another while others watched Victor with disapproving expressions. The older man sitting nearby shook his head slightly, as if silently judging Victor's behavior. Victor, now realizing the attention was not in his favor, tried to mask his irritation, but instead of backing down, he threw out another jab. "Cheap philosophy sounds nice, but the real world doesn't work that way." Caitlin looked at him, still composed. "The real world is made by people, Victor, and in the end, how we treat others says more about who we are than anything else." Victor was visibly uncomfortable with Caitlin's response. He glanced around, noticing the passengers' attention was no longer in his favor. Some whispered among themselves while others stared directly at him, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. He was beginning to realize that his usual tactics weren't working. What frustrated him more was that Caitlin wasn't arguing. She was simply responding with unshakable confidence, making him look more foolish with every exchange. He crossed his arms, trying to regain some sense of control. "You know, Caitlin, I get what you're saying. The world can be tough, and sure, maybe kindness matters, but let's be real, status, power, and money are what get you places. People respect success." Caitlin tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe respect isn't something you can buy. Maybe it's about how you earn it." Victor scoffed, shaking his head. "Easy for you to say, but in reality, if you don't show what you have, people won't take you seriously. That's just how it works." Caitlin remained calm, her tone steady. "I think real respect comes from what you do, not what you show." Victor let out a short laugh, though it was clear it was more out of frustration than amusement. "And what exactly have you done? What makes you so sure of yourself?" Caitlin looked at him for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to answer. She didn't need to prove anything, but she also understood that sometimes people like Victor needed a little perspective before she could speak. The flight attendant returned, this time addressing Caitlin directly. "Miss Clark," she said with a polite smile, "the captain asked me to inform you that your connection in Tokyo is confirmed. He also sends his best regards." The name Clark seemed to echo through first class. A few passengers who had been quietly observing suddenly widened their eyes in realization. A murmur spread through the cabin. Victor froze, his smirk disappeared. "Clark," he muttered, almost in disbelief. "Caitlin Clark." Caitlin nodded politely to the flight attendant and thanked her, paying little attention to the growing whispers around them. She turned back to Victor, who now looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You okay, Victor?" she asked with a slight smile. Victor opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around, noticing the way other passengers were now glancing at him, not with admiration, but with barely concealed amusement or quiet judgment. He sank into his seat, suddenly feeling very small. He had spent the entire flight trying to put Caitlin down, only to realize too late that she wasn't just some random athlete. She was one of the most accomplished basketball players in the world. His face flushed. He fumbled for words. I had no idea. I mean, you Didn't say who you were, Caitlin simply shrugged. I didn't think it was necessary. Victor tried to recover. I didn't mean to. He stumbled over his words, searching for a way to save himself. Look, I didn't know who I was talking to. Caitlin sighed, her expression unreadable. Victor, what you said doesn't change just because you now know my name. The truth isn't about who you're speaking to, it's about how you choose to treat people. Victor sat there, speechless. He looked at Caitlin, then at the other passengers who were now openly watching him, some shaking their heads. The humiliation was undeniable. Caitlin leaned back in her seat, clearly done with the conversation. You know, life is hard enough for everyone, she said. The last thing we need is people trying to put others down to make themselves feel bigger. Victor didn't argue. For the first time in the entire flight, he was silent. He stared at his hands, Caitlin's words echoing in his mind. The arrogance he had carried at the beginning of the journey had disappeared, replaced by something much closer to shame. As the minutes passed, he couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. Everything Caitlin had said seemed so simple, yet it had cut deep. He thought about how many times he had judged people without really knowing them. Maybe she was right. Maybe success wasn't about showing off. Maybe it was about something more. As the plane began to prepare for landing, Victor finally mustered the courage to speak again. He turned to Caitlin, his voice quieter than before. I need to apologize, not because of who you are, but because I was arrogant. I acted like an idiot. Caitlin looked at him, her expression as calm as ever. She waited a moment before responding. I appreciate the apology, but more than that, I hope you learn from this. Victor nodded slowly. He had spent the entire flight trying to prove something to Caitlin, to the other passengers, maybe even to himself. And yet, in the end, the only thing he had proven was how little he understood. As they disembarked, Victor stood still in the terminal, watching Caitlin walk away. A few fans discreetly approached her, asking for photos. She greeted each one with patience and a genuine smile. No arrogance, no hurry. It was clear that her simplicity and kindness weren't an act, they were who she truly was. Victor looked down at his own hands and sighed. He knew he needed to change. Caitlin's words still echoed in his mind, a reminder that a person's true worth isn't about their status, but about how they choose to treat others. As Caitlin disappeared into the airport crowd, Victor felt something new. Maybe it was humility. Maybe it was hope. Maybe that encounter hadn't been a coincidence. Maybe it was a chance to start over. Like this video and subscribe this channel. Thank you.